All right, so let's move on to our another W is workers. Workers and other people. So poor worker health can impact the farm safety, and because, right, people can carry pathogens just like animals can. So if we're sick, we can spread these pathogens to the produce just the same as we can an animal. So it's important that we train our workers and they know what to do, how to identify if they're sick and what to do if they are sick. So workers are a food safety concern because they can carry pathogens like Shigella, hepatitis. We know this, norovirus. They can spread them. So as they're harvesting, especially if they're harvesting and packing with their hands, and especially if there's not a good hand washing policy in place or they're not following it correctly, they can certainly spread these human pathogens, usually through the fecal oral route. And that's exactly what it sounds like. Somebody goes to the bathroom, they don't wash their hands, and then they have that fecal matter on their hands and it just gets transferred to whatever they touch. So most of our workers require training to make sure that they understand the importance of hand washing. And I think during COVID, this is really, people have really taken this to heart now. Before COVID, we already said this. I don't know how much people listened or did it, but now it's even, we see it a lot more anyway. I see signage up more. I see that hand washing stations around. So that's great. And they needed to have training to know how to handle the illnesses and any injuries should they have them on the farm. Because it's we're not just worried about fecal matter, right? We don't want to transfer any bodily fluids. So we don't, blood, urine, you name it, saliva. We don't want to transfer any of that. So poor hygiene on the farm could include improper hand washing practices. Maybe it's dirty restrooms. Maybe they're used to handling manure. They're not washing their hands in between. It could be a variety of things. Maybe they're not changing their clothes every day, especially on diversified farms, where you have somebody who's feeding the chickens and then they're out milking the cows and then they're going in the produce field to pick tomatoes by hand. Those clothes may be a source of contamination. So we just have to keep that in mind as we think about this. So hand sanitizer cannot replace proper hand washing. And the reason being is that sanitizer, which we kind of already talked about that, right? About sanitizers. Basically, if there's a lot of organic matter, that the killing capacity of that sanitizer just decreases by a lot. So that's why the best practice is to wash your hands using, singing the happy birthday song twice. Make sure you're washing using soap, warm water as much as you possible, scrubbing all surfaces of your hand, rinsing them, drying them, and then applying hand sanitizer. So I always get the question, well, what if that's all I have was hand sanitizer? I pick morels. I'm out in the woods. There's no bathroom. Well, I say that's better than nothing, right? There's not much you can do, but man, I would certainly at least start out with clean hands before I went mushroom picking, or use gloves, or especially disposable gloves that you can keep changing out if you think you contaminated those in some way. So when must hands be washed? Pretty much anytime you change activities. And any of you guys who've worked in the restaurant business, same principles apply, right? After using the toilet, before starting or returning to work, before and after eating and smoking, before putting on gloves if you're using them, after touching animals or animal waste, or any other time. That's kind of the catch-all, that last one. Or any other time your hands may become contaminated. But so again, I don't know if I have this in this. I don't think I have this in there, but there's nothing saying your farm has to have a glove policy, that you must wear gloves when picking fruits and vegetables. There's nothing that says that. However, if you don't have that policy, you need to have a very robust hand washing policy, and that your workers know all these bullet points. So you have hand washing stations close enough that they're not continually spending their whole working time going back and forth to the restroom to wash their hands, right? So the closer that hand washing station is, the better. And these don't have to be hard plumbed stations. It's not like in a restaurant. These can be freestanding, homemade hand washing stations. We see a lot. They buy the freestanding hand washing stations you can use for camping, right? They just have a gallon, a container you fill with water. There's a little a pump. They can pump the water up and through, and then it collects it in a separate container. Perfectly fine. Those are like $80. You can also make one yourself. That's totally fine, right? So, and it doesn't have to be warm water if that's not what you have. There's no rule in produce, not in anything else, but in produce that water has to be hot when you're using, or a certain temperature. So steps to cleaning and sanitizing anything. This includes even your hands, right? We're going to rinse all the debris off. We want to get off as much organic matter as possible. We're going to clean that surface or wash that surface with a detergent. We're going to rinse that detergent away, and then we're going to add our sanitizer. So again, using that sanitizer is important just because it kills any of those residual bacteria that could be present on the surface. So restrooms, well, they need to be provided for employees per OSHA guideline, one restroom for every 20 employees, and it needs to be located no more than a quarter-mile walk from the work site. And I believe I always forget this, but I think it's or a quarter-mile or less than a 10-minute drive. So if you can get to that porta pot within 10 minutes of driving, then that's allowable too, per OSHA guidelines. So these restrooms also need to be cleaned on a regular basis and documented that they are cleaned. This again is pretty self-explanatory, but all urination and defecation should be done in the toilet, right? We're not going out in the fields. We're putting all toilet paper in the toilet, not in a separate waste paper basket or garbage can, or just on the floor of the porta pots or bathrooms. And we always make sure we wash our hands after use. And so worker clothing, again, this could be a source of contamination, but we want to make sure that it's not. So clean clothes should be worn every day. Footwear is important. Again, think back to that diversified farm. You're walking through where your pasture for your cattle, and then you're going into the produce field, right? Where your boots could be dragging stuff from one field to the other. So we do see a lot of more, the diversified farms are designating footwear. So they have a pair of boots or a boot cover that they put on in between different operations. Like I said, gloves not required, but if they're worn, they should need to be changed if they become contaminated or torn. And if they're reusable gloves, they need to be on some sort of cleaning schedule. And so we see this too, even on disposable gloves, so a white disposable glove should never be black at the fingertips, right? That means it's dirty. It needs to be changed. But we see that quite a bit. So just because you're protecting yourself from whatever your glove is touching doesn't mean that dirty glove isn't transferring it to everything else it touches. So you want to make sure if it is reusable, which that is totally fine as well, but have it on a cleaning schedule. Is it, once a day you're cleaning those gloves, washing those gloves, or whatever. And any aprons, gloves, or any other hats or whatever you're using, food safety equipment, should be removed before using the toilet and stored in a clean designated area when not in use. So best practice is don't let your workers take home aprons and then bring them back, because who knows what they were doing with that stuff. And same goes with harvest tools. We see that a lot where workers will have their own, say, knife or scissors or whatever that they're bringing in, but you have no idea what they were using that knife for the night before. Maybe it was cutting up chicken and they didn't wash it, right? So it's best to control all that at your operation. So sick workers should not handle produce. Let them do something else, right? Could they do some paperwork? Could they do some laundering, do the laundry? Can they do something else? But we don't want them handling produce. And you might ask the question, well, why would they, right? Why would somebody want to do that? But the reason being is a lot of these workers that are in the produce industry, one, they may not get sick time, and two, a lot of them are paid by the pound. So if you're paid by the pound and no sick time, chances are you're probably going to be out there harvesting, even though you're super sick and probably shedding pathogens. So again, that's why you as the boss, or if you wear every single hat and you're the boss and the worker, you need to know what your limitations are or what your workers' limitations are. So here's some common signs of foodborne illness, and workers should be trained to know what these are, right? And it's pretty simple: diarrhea, nausea, vomiting, abdominal cramps, fever, chills, muscle aches, headache, things like that. So most of us have had a foodborne illness, and we can at least identify the symptoms. But you may have a worker who really wants to work because they need the money and they're sick, but then you as the boss needs to be able to identify if they are really sick, and they can do something else, but they just shouldn't be harvesting in the field. Yeah, here we go. Why would they come to sick? All these reasons. Maybe they can't get to the doctor. Maybe they don't have insurance. And maybe you just, especially if it's your farm and you're the market manager, the food safety person, the harvester, and everything in between. Sometimes you just need to get the work done. But just know the risk that could be associated with that. And so worker injury, just make sure that there's a first aid kit available. And anytime a worker gets a cut, we want to, especially if it's on the hands and they're harvesting, we want to make sure we clean and bandage the wounds. And then they should wear a glove as a double barrier. And if any of that produce is contaminated with blood or any other bodily fluids, we want to get rid of them, and we want to clean and sanitize any of those areas that had been in contact with bodily fluids. And that's what we always say, what comes out of an animal or a human should never go back in to another one. And that's pretty true, right? We don't want anything that's come out of an animal or human that we don't want to put it back into us. So as a good rule of thumb. So all workers should receive basic sanitation and hygiene training at least annually. And that's a pretty easy thing to do. Usually we tell growers, just put together a list of bullet points. If you go to our website, www.safeproducein.com, we have a tab with resources, and we actually have a video. It's in English, Spanish, and I believe Creole is the third one. But it was put out by Cornell several years ago. And so it is, it looks a little outdated, but all the concepts are spot on. So it's talking about all the good ag practices. It's about 15 minutes long. You can pull it up on your computer, have employees sit down, watch that, and then just document that they've had that training. And it's a perfect training, takes 15 minutes. So it's easy. But the training doesn't have to be burdensome, right? This shouldn't be a day-long thing or anything like that, but it should be documented, must be documented. And here's just some examples of what that worker training should include. Just general information, like the stuff a little bit about what we talked about in the beginning. What are some of the basic health policies about not handling produce? Some of the basic sanitation policies, so how to wash your hands, restroom procedures, things like that. And any farm specific procedures, right? So where's the location of facilities? What's the discipline policy? So what happens when I find out I see you not washing your hands after you go to the bathroom? How many strikes and you're out? What are the rules? And that's important to have as well.